Now, as a part of the deployment of Windows 10, often we have to deal with user profile migration. And so, as I said before, I mean, this might seem a little bit out of place, but because it could have been put in the enterprise deployment module, and it certainly could have. It's technically done after deployment. I thought it fit here just because we're talking about user profiles. So I want to go into a little bit more detail about the primary tool that you would use in an enterprise environment to migrate user data if and when that user data is actually stored on the local computer. You can get around some of this if you use roaming profiles, if you use UEV, although that's unlikely that you would have been using it prior to really the last year or so. But you can get around some of it if the user data is stored up on the server. I don't really care about what's stored on the desktop, and so we could deploy a new operating system, and we just have to get you connected back to your data that's on the server. But that's not always the case. In fact, in many cases, you've got stuff in the profiles that is stored locally on those computers because we haven't taken any other steps to make it so that it's out on the network. And so that makes this fairly important, and we needed to go into a little more detail because I think Microsoft's going to expect you to know a bit more than just the name of the utility. I mean, that's a start. We got to know that it's the user state migration tool, that it's included in the Windows assessment and deployment kit, and it's designed for large environments. Okay? But we also need to know the individual components and the actual steps that we are going to take. Now, prior to migration, migrating user data and settings, we want to consider what exactly we want to migrate. Okay, so it can include user accounts, user settings, and data files, operating system settings, application data. Now, installed applications are not migrated, just the data and settings. So the applications will need to be reinstalled on the destination computer or installed for the first time before you import all of the settings. If the problem is you try to import all the settings, well, the settings include registry settings, and if the registry locations aren't even there because the program isn't installed, then that part of it would not work. So we don't have to migrate all of this stuff, and that's why the first part of the process is deciding, okay, exactly what are we going to migrate, and then getting in and digging in to the tool that we're going to use to perform that migration. The USMT is actually two tools. Both are command line tools, and then along with that, you're going to use configuration files. Scan state is the tool that you use at the start of the process. That collects information that's going to be transferred to the new computer. And then load state is done on the other end, and it actually transfers the settings and data to the new computer. Now, both of these are configurable via customizable XML files. The XML files are going to control exactly what information I'm going to be transferring, folder locations as well as data types. So essentially, this is a two-step process. You collect the files and settings, you store them in when you collect them, you're storing them in an intermediate store, usually out on the network, and then I restore those files and settings to the new destination computer. The first step is scan state, and the second step is load state. So let's look more at the process for USMT. When we're collecting files and settings from the source computer, it is very important that you close all applications. It would also be important that you get rid of any unnecessary applications. So if there does need to be some cleanup of those programs, then you would probably want to do that ahead of time. Then scan state command, and we specify all the XML files that we're going to want to use. There are some defaults. We can create our own custom. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then I would prepare and restore the files and settings on the destination computer. Obviously the operating system has to be installed. We also mentioned that the applications need to be installed on the destination computer before I run load state. When I run load state, all I'm doing is specifying the same set of XML files that I specified with scan state, and I'm specifying the location of the data. At that point, we would log off and log back on, and then test and verify that all the settings were restored. There are some additional features to the user state migration tool that we should know. Number one, I mean, yes, it's a command line tool, but it's scriptable, and it also provides a high level of customization. Okay, so you can greatly customize what you're copying by folder location, by data type. Yes, it's done in XML files, so it's not, necessarily the easiest thing to do, but the user state migration tool comes with a huge help file that will walk us through those processes. It also provides safe migration of user accounts, operating system, and application settings, ultimately reducing the overall cost of deploying a new version of Windows. And the way that it's doing that is by maintaining user data and settings. So it preserves that. It has less of an effect on user productivity. It reduces end user downtime. Now, there was a new hard link migration store in version 4.0, which is the current version. This is used in refresh computer scenarios. Basically, it just doesn't duplicate the files. It doesn't copy them to an intermediate store. It keeps them on the system. Remember that one of the features of WIM image-based installations was that it is a non-destructive installation. Okay, and so a refresh computer is usually a wipe and load, where I am, and by that we just mean we are essentially just overwriting. Okay, so I'm booting the computer up to an image disk and I'm putting an image on it. But the beauty here is that we can store the user profile locally on that disk, and the application of that image is not destructive in nature to that user profile. And so it reduces the space requirements on the server, and it reduces the time that it takes to copy to and from. You also have offline migration, also new to 4.0, and this allows the collection of data from offline versions of Windows. So you can use the scan state command in Windows PE. What that essentially means is that you can make it a part of the imaging process. You boot up to Windows PE, and we can have a script that is going to run automatically, or a script that we're going to execute, and that script looks at the local Windows installation that's on the drive about to be imaged, copies the user state data out of it to the network, then images the system, okay? And then we can run load state on the other side. So that's just about how, it's changing not the order, but it's changing specifically when scan state would be run. So that would be another option in this current version of the user state migration tool. So we've talked about scan state and load state and what they do, but let's look a little bit deeper at these XML files. You've got a couple different types of XML files, the migration XML files and then the config XML files. The migration XML files are rules for migrating. That's where you start to get into the different data types and things like that that are going to be migrated. And there are three of them. There's MIG-app, MIG-docs, and MIG-user. And the names really say it all. On the first one, it's rules for mapping or migrating application settings. The second would be for documents, and then MIG-user is user profiles. Okay, and so you can go into those migration files and control which data types are going to be migrated, control which locations. The config XML file is used to exclude certain elements from the migration, so it just configures the process. There are also component manifests which control which operating system components are going to be migrated and how they're migrated. And then USMT does have some other internal files that just help it do its job. So a few more components, from the outset, we are interacting with scan state, load state, and these XML files. We don't really have anything to do with the other files that are there. That config file is a very important file. It's the file that is used to provide a high level of customization for the user state migration tool. You can use it specifically to modify the default configuration. If you want to include all of the default elements and you don't need to change, say, where the store is being created, profile migration behavior, then there's no reason to create a new config file. You can just use the existing one. But if you do need to modify this, then you use the gen config parameter of scan state, and that'll generate a new config file. Once you've generated the new config file, you can go in and look at the elements. It's basically a copy of the default one, you can go look at the elements and then you can modify that to adjust the migration, to fit your particular needs. So we've talked about scan state, but we want to look a little bit deeper at the actual format of these commands. So you can see here scan state, and then we have a UNC path to a folder that's been created. So / the name of the server / the name of the share. Then you have the I parameter, which is for import, and that specifies what we are which migration files we're going to use. So in this case, we're just doing user profile settings, and then we're doing application settings. The config parameter, and then just using the default config.xml, and then you are specifying the user account DB service that's actually doing the migration, and then the user whose information is being migrated, in this case, Don. And so that is the actual command. As I said before, tons of help information. There's a lot of planning that goes into this, a lot of practice. So you don't necessarily need to remember those commands. I'm pointing out some of the key elements to you, and that's really more for exam purposes. This would migrate profile directories. It would migrate the access control list associated with the directories and several different file types. It will not migrate installed applications, and there are some operating system settings that don't get migrated as well. Map drives is one of those. That's not a big deal. We do that through login scripts or group policy preferences. Customized icons, if anybody's even taken the time to do that, don't get migrated. Taskbar settings from XP, but that's kind of old news. We don't necessarily care about that anymore. So, and you might, in the help documents, you might find a few other things, but it's kind of, they are little random things that don't get migrated. The vast majority of the information is going to be migrated. On the other side, load state is going to be used to restore the user settings and data from the migration store. This, we will just specify the same migration XML files, the same set of config files. So it's very similar. You see load state, the name of the server, the name of the folder where the profile is created. Okay. Then you've got the migration files. You've got the user that we're migrating on behalf of. You've got the account and the password for and that's for the administrative account this is running under. All right. So to prepare, so that's the command, and it'll copy everything from that network location. Now to prepare for this, we already said you have to install the operating system, you have to install the applications, and you should do any updates. Obviously the operating system has to be installed, but as we talked about, if the application is not there, then it may not fail per se, but the settings for any applications that aren't installed will just not be restored because there's nowhere to put them. There is no application that is pointing towards them. So it is very important that you follow that order.